The emergency broadcast hit every screen on Lunar Base Artemis 4 at Aero 347. Not just the command monitors, not just the duty stations. Every screen, the personal tablets in the bunk quarters, the mess hall displays, the geological survey terminals, the window-mounted environmental readouts that nobody ever actually looked at. Every single one lit up simultaneously with a priority flag that the base's system had never once triggered in its 11-year operational history. Lieutenant Commander Maya Reyes saw it from the equipment bay, where she'd been running pre-shift diagnostics on the survey drones because she hadn't been sleeping well, which had been true every night since the Krath Dominion's ambassador walked out of the Galactic Assembly 3 months ago and described what he called educational consequences for humanity's latest attempt to gain equal trade status. She opened the feed. It was Earth. 17 orbital relay cameras, all showing the same continent from different angles, and something was fundamentally wrong with the Pacific Northwest. She stared at it for 4 seconds before her brain assembled what she was seeing into something that had a name. Seattle was gone. Not burning, not damaged, gone. A 40-kilometer radius of the city she had grown up in, where her mother still walked the waterfront every single morning, had been converted to superheated plasma in approximately 12 seconds by a Krath Dominion orbital bombardment array. The thermal scar was already cooling at the edges, pale white fading to gray in the satellite imagery, the way a wound edges towards scar tissue before you finish processing that you've been cut. 5 other cities had been hit simultaneously: Portland, Sacramento, Minneapolis, Nashville, Charlotte. 2.3 million people. 6 minutes. Reyes stood in the equipment bay for 37 seconds. She would count them later, trying to understand what happened in that interval. And then the Krath secondary broadcast overrode every frequency. Supreme Empress Vialkara appeared on every screen. She was 4 centuries old, which had done things to her face that nothing natural could. Angular, immovable, compound eyes that caught light like oil on dark water, 7 layers of formal robes bearing the insignia of a civilization that had ruled 60 star systems for longer than humanity had written language. The translator rendered her into cold, measured English with the particular flatness of a system that had stopped trying to capture the emotional register of what it was processing. "This is a recalibration," the Empress said. "The targeted population centers are a proportionate adjustment to clarify humanity's classification status within the Assembly's tier framework. Humanity will sign the Treaty of Adjustment within 72 hours, surrender the contested trade corridors, and reduce its representation to Tier 4. Standing. Non-compliance will result in further recalibration." She ended the broadcast. The Treaty of Adjustment would reduce Earth to a Krath protectorate, human labor, resources, and trade routes, accessible to Dominion extraction without compensation, without recourse, without end. It was not negotiation. It was the formal documentation of a cage. Non-compliance meant more cities. In the equipment bay, Reyes didn't move for another moment. She thought about her mother's morning walk, the waterfront, the specific way Seattle's sky looked from the water at 6 in the morning, gray and cold and perfect, the way home always looks in the memory you didn't know you were making. Then she put the grief somewhere it could be carried rather than somewhere it would stop, her. And she picked up her radio. "This is Reyes," she said, her voice completely flat. "Get me the command hub. Tell them I need to talk about what Dr. Vero's survey team found last week beneath the Mare Basin." Her communications officer hesitated. "Commander, given the current situation, the geological anomaly seems—" "Get me the command hub," Reyes said, "right now," because for 6 days she had been sitting on something, trying to decide who to tell. Trying to figure out if what the survey drones had found 2,300 meters beneath the surface of Mare Tranquillitatis was what she thought it was, and what it meant if she was right, and whether she had any right to do what she was considering doing with it. The Empress had just made that decision for her. Dr. Elias Vero had found the anomaly the way almost every great discovery in human history had been made, by looking for something else entirely. The survey drones had been mapping subsurface density for a proposed power grid expansion beneath Artemis 4. 18 months of geological baseline data. Exactly the kind of project that kept budgets funded and produced nothing worth talking about. Vero ran it because it was his departmental assignment, and because the Mare Basin had been quiet for 11 years, and there was no reason to expect that to change. On day 547, the drones stopped returning expected data. The density signature at 2,300 meters below the mare surface was wrong. Not in the way that instrument error is wrong, but in the way that reality is wrong, the kind of wrongness that means something has been there a very long time, waiting quietly for someone to finally point a sensor at it. Where the lunar mantle should have shown consistent basaltic composition, the drones were reading a cavity. And inside the cavity, a material that Varro's analysis software flagged with a result he had not seen in 20 years of planetary science. Unknown composition. No match in geological database. He had recalibrated the drones 4 times. Sent them down 4 times. Got the same answer 4 times. He had told Reyes because she was base commander and because he was frightened, in the quiet, specific way of a scientist who has found something his entire field of knowledge cannot explain. Now, 20 hours after the orbital strikes, the crawler moved through the bore shaft Reyes had quietly authorized the drones to widen over the previous 6 days. When the shaft opened into the chamber below, the crawler's headlights were the only light. Then they weren't. The chamber was 847 meters across and 212 meters tall, and its walls were not rock. They were smooth, dark, slightly iridescent, and they glowed, faintly, perfectly, in a blue-white light that emanated from the material itself. The floor was machined flat with a precision that would challenge modern human tooling, and across it, spiraling outward, from the center in a mathematical progression that made Reyes's brain insist without knowing why, that it was reading something important. Markings, not carved, inlaid, into the material itself. At the center of the chamber stood a column, raised platform, 3 meters tall. The column itself, 2.5 meters. Thinner at the top, where, at its apex, where Reyes stopped walking because she needed a moment to accept what she was seeing. There was a human handprint. 5 fingers. Correct proportions. Correct scale. She turned to Varro. He had gone pale in the particular way of someone who has run out of explanations and is now fully in the territory of something larger than himself. "How old?" she asked. He looked at his instruments. "The dating system is returning errors," he said. "It won't produce a number." "Why not?" His voice was very careful. "Because the material is older than the moon itself." Reyes turned back to the column, to the handprint built into its apex 50,000 years before the first human being could hold a tool. She placed her palm against it. The chamber ignited with light, calm, complete, perfectly controlled. Every surface in 847 meters of ancient wall becoming alive with soft illumination, the spiral markings on the floor completing themselves with sudden vivid clarity, as if they had been waiting for this contact to remember what they were for. A voice said, "Identification confirmed. Welcome, inheritor. I have been waiting a very long time." The voice spoke in English, not translated English, native English with phrasing and cadence that suggested it had been built from decades of listening to human communication. It came from everywhere in the chamber simultaneously, which should have been unsettling but was instead, in a way Reyes couldn't fully explain, simply reassuring. She called it Oracle. Because a name made it real. Because she needed something this large to be real. "The Krath Dominion's bombardment of your planet," Oracle said, "is not a disciplinary adjustment. It is the response to a specific fear. The fear that your species would find this installation before they could destroy it." Varro said, "They know this is here? The Krath have known an Ethon installation existed inside your moon for 8,400 years. They have been unable to locate it because the installation's material does not interact with any scanning technology they possess. They have spent 4 millennia searching by alternative methods, all of which failed." A pause. "I believe they became confident, finally, that it could not be found. The escalation of pressure on your species over the past decade suggests they decided it was safe to act." "Who are the Ethon?" Reyes asked. "We are," Oracle said. "Were. We were the first civilization in this galactic region, arising 60,000 years before any other species developed language. We spent 30,000 years exploring and understanding something that the galaxy's natural probability made unavoidable, that sentient life would not arise on its own within any time frame relevant to us. The conditions were too rare, the windows too narrow. The chamber walls shifted, not physically, but their illumination changed, becoming a display, showing worlds, genetic sequences, terraforming schematics, the vast, quiet work of a civilization that had decided to give the galaxy a gift it would never know to thank them for. So we seeded it, Oracle said. 300 planets across 30,000 years. Terraforming, genetic introduction, environmental management, every species currently in the Galactic assembly, including the Krath, exists because the Ethon built the conditions for their existence. The silence that followed was the particular silence of the ground shifting under a world view. The Krath's ancestors, Oracle continued, were one of our earliest seeded species. We watched them for millennia with optimism. They were curious, creative, complex. Another pause. Something in its quality that Reyes would have called grief if she'd been asked to characterize it. Then, 10,000 years ago, a Krath expedition found one of our smaller research stations. They found the seeding records. They found out what they actually were. And they built a religion out of it, Reyes said quietly. Because she already knew where this was going. They stripped our role from the record entirely, Oracle said. Replaced it with a theology of divine origin. A narrative that the first ones had specifically chosen the Krath to govern all lesser species. And then they did something we had not predicted. They began finding and destroying every other Ethon installation they could locate, to eliminate the evidence that contradicted their claim. The chamber walls showed coordinates, dates, military authorization codes. 47 installations, every one of them that they found. Reyes looked at those records and understood, in a single clear moment, the full shape of what was in the chamber around her. This is the evidence that destroys their authority, she said. Over 60 systems. The last testimony, Oracle confirmed. A complete authenticated archive, the Krath's discovery, their internal communications, their deliberate decision, the destruction of our installations, cryptographically signed in a format that the Assembly's own verification systems will confirm as genuine within minutes of receipt. A pause. The Ethon built this as their final act, not a weapon, a witness. Because witnesses, given the right moment, can be more devastating than anything that fires. Why us? Reyes said. Why humanity specifically? Oracle took a moment. Because for 3,000 years of observation, the Ethon recorded one consistent anomaly in human behavior. When encountering a weaker species, in crisis humans, uniquely, consistently, chose to assist at a cost to themselves. Not all humans, not always, but enough to be a pattern. The Ethon believed the species most likely to use their legacy wisely was the species most capable of understanding what things cost. A beat. They believed in you. Her radio crackled. Her watch officer, voice stripped of its professional baseline. Commander, we have Krath vessels dropping from FTL at lunar distance. Counting. A pause long enough to mean the number was being verified. 480 warships, Commander. We are completely surrounded. Reyes looked at the column, at the handprint still glowing from her touch. Oracle, she said. What does this installation actually do? The Krath called their formation doctrine the Iron Covenant. 480 warships materialized from FTL transit in a perfect sphere around the moon, cutting every exit vector, establishing an orbital blockade before any Earth vessel in the system could have responded, which didn't matter because there were only 7 human vessels in lunar space, none of them warships. When General Six, commanding from his flagship, broadcast the ultimatum, his translator rendered it precisely. Transmit the installation's coordinates within 2 hours. If the installation was confirmed destroyed within 12, the orbital bombardment of Earth would stop at the current 6 cities. If the installation was not confirmed destroyed, 12 more strikes would follow every 6 hours. It was not a threat. The Krath did not make threats. It was a logistics briefing. Six was not cruel, in the way that geological events are not cruel. He was simply an instrument of an empire that had not been challenged in a meaningful way for 3,000 years, operating with the uncomplicated confidence of someone who had never once been surprised by what happened next. He was about to be surprised. Below the lunar surface, Oracle had finished explaining what the installation contained. The seed array, housed in a structured interior space comprising 60% of the moon's total volume, built from the inside out over 50,000 years of Ethon engineering, was a self-replicating construction network. Given raw material and a blueprint, it could manufacture any structure the Ethon had ever designed. Using lunar mass as feedstock, it could, in full operation, produce the complete Ethon fleet configuration. "How many ships?" Reyes had asked. 200,000, Oracle said. In the silence that followed, Varro made a sound that was not quite a word. "The Krath fleet," Reyes said, "is 11,000 ships, total." "Yes, so for 8,400 years they've been terrified of exactly this." "Yes. And the last testimony, the broadcast. How does it transmit?" "The transmission array," Oracle explained, "was housed within the natural surface geology of Mare Tranquillitatis's central crater peaks. Built into the lunar landscape 50,000 years ago with such patience and precision that no human or Krath instrument had ever distinguished it from natural formation patterns. Full activation would raise the array through controlled geological motion, bring the transmission surfaces to alignment, and broadcast simultaneously to every receiver within 12 light-years on every assembly frequency. But the timing was the problem. 6 minutes for the geological raise, 30 seconds for broadcast alignment. The Krath, at their current orbital distance, could strike a confirmed surface target in 4 minutes and 20 seconds. Full activation would be detectable. The moment it began, the Krath would target the emerging array and destroy it, before it ever broadcast. "There is one alternative sequence," Oracle said. "The geological raise can be initiated under partial authorization before full activation occurs. If the raise begins first and full activation is completed during the raise, the broadcast runs its 40-second sequence from that moment, not 6 minutes. The array is already in motion. What stops them from targeting the array during the raise? The geological systems will be in active motion through the near-surface structure. The Krath will be firing into active shifting terrain. Their targeting accuracy historically degrades 40 to 65% during active Ethon geological events." A pause. "Historically, because we modeled this scenario 50,000 years ago." Reyes looked at the column, at the handprint that should not exist. She thought of 2.3 million people, of 60 systems under a Krath authority built entirely on a fabricated history, of 47 destroyed Ethon installations and everything they might have said if they hadn't been erased. "Begin the geological sequence," she said. The chamber shook, not violently, not like an earthquake, but with the deep, purposeful vibration of something vast remembering how to move. Above the surface of Mare Tranquillitatis, nothing was visible for 90 seconds. Then the crater floor began to breathe. General Six saw the seismic reading on his bridge sensors and spent 14 seconds trying to classify it. His tactical database had extensive entries on Ethon installations, theoretical entries, built from the fragments of records the Dominion had recovered from the 47 they'd destroyed. Every entry described static structures, permanent, fixed, built to last, not built to move. The concept of an Ethon installation in active geological operation had no entry in any Krath tactical reference in existence. He spent 14 seconds. Then his signals officer said a single Krath phrase that translated approximately as, "The activation signature is live." Six ordered immediate maximum orbital strike on Mare Tranquillitatis, all targeting, platforms, all available strike assets. He did not hesitate. He had not risen to fleet general by hesitating when the situation became clear. What was clear was that he had perhaps 4 minutes. Below, in the Ethon chamber, Reyes pressed her palm to the column and held it there. "Genomic verification complete," Oracle said, and there was something in its voice that Reyes could only call recognition, the sound of something that has waited very long meeting the thing it waited for. "Full activation confirmed. Last testimony preparing for broadcast. 40 seconds. On the surface of the moon, the crater peaks of Mare Tranquillitatis were rising, not catastrophically, not violently, with a geological precision that looked from orbit like the moon was waking up, the peaks lifting on columns of Ethon alloy that had been embedded in the lunar structure for longer than humanity had existed, their faces turning, aligning, the transmission surfaces that had been press flush against the interior of the lunar topography for 50,000 years now, turning toward the stars for the very first time. The first Krath strike hit the crater floor. The explosion bloomed in silence and no atmosphere to carry the sound, and blew a 4-kilometer crater in the regolith. The debris column rose 80 kilometers into space and immediately began obscuring targeting sensors on the inbound side. The array kept rising. The second strike hit the near edge of the central peak formation, another debris cloud. The geological systems responded, not retreating but redistributing, the active motion shifting direction and speed in ways the Krath's automated targeting had not modeled. The third strike took the upper third of one rising structure. Clean destruction. Precise. The array was still rising, and the fourth strike, which 6 had calculated would complete the destruction of the primary broadcast surface, arrived in the same second that the last testimony of the Ethon continuance transmitted outward at the speed of light, simultaneously, on every frequency the Galactic Assembly had ever used. It was not a close thing, in the end. It was a 2-second margin, the broadcast running its final sequence while the fourth Krath strike was still in transit. 2 seconds was enough. The universe doesn't wait for closer calls than that. The broadcast lasted 11 minutes and 40 seconds. In those 11 minutes and 40 seconds, every civilization the Ethon had ever seeded, every species in the assembly, on every planet, on every vessel, at every station, received the complete archive, the seeding records, the genetic blueprints for civilizations they had been told had arisen from divine will, the terraforming schematics for worlds the Krath had claimed were gifts of their gods, the 30,000-year record of what the Ethon had actually done, and then, beginning at minute 4, carrying through to the end, the Krath's own internal communications from 10,000 years ago, authenticated and intact. The discovery, the council deliberations, the decision, the construction of the theology, the 8,400-year campaign to erase the truth, 47 destroyed installations, coordinates, dates, Krath military authorization codes, each one signed. The Assembly's own cryptographic verification systems confirmed authenticity within minutes of receipt on 43 different independent networks simultaneously. In 11 minutes and 40 seconds, the theological foundation of the Krath Dominion's authority over 60 star systems ceased to exist. General 6 did not order a fifth strike, not because the Empress countermanded him, not because a tactical calculation changed, but because something began happening across the Iron Covenant's communication network that had no entry in his operational experience. His own ship captains were opening channels not to him, to each other. Questions were moving through the fleet's internal network, Krath to Krath, in a frequency of traffic that the communication systems flagged as unprecedented. His signals officer reported 47 simultaneous high-priority channel requests, none of them originating from the Empress, all of them asking the same thing in different ways. Is it true? 6 stood on his bridge for a long time. 200 years he had served the Dominion. He had suppressed 4 species uprisings and ended 2 border conflicts. He had carried out the Empress's instructions with the clean efficiency that his rank required. He was Krath enough to understand immediately what the broadcast meant. He was also, it turned out, Krath enough to make one specific decision. He would not fire a fifth strike at a moon that had already broadcast. There was nothing left to destroy that would help anything. He ordered the Iron Covenant to hold position. It was the most consequential military order of his career. He would spend the rest of his life defending it, and he would never regret it. Supreme Empress Vael Kara had ruled for 4 centuries on the certainty that the Ethon installation existed and could not be found. She had authorized 847 separate operations to locate it across those 4 centuries. She had diverted resources equivalent to a planetary GDP into the search. She had built a theological empire, a military dominion, and the subjugation of 60 worlds on one assumption, that the truth the installation contained would stay buried. A USAF Space Corps lieutenant commander had found it in 6 months of drone survey work. When the Assembly's simultaneous contact request reached her throne room, 43 species, all of them, requesting her attendance at an emergency session, the Empress sat very still for a long time. In the word requesting, there was something she had not heard directed at the Krath Dominion in 10,000 years. Not since before the theology, not since before the systematic removal of the evidence. She recognized it. Accountability. The Galactic Assembly session that followed did not wait for the Krath to attend. The 43 member species convened without them, which was, in diplomatic protocol, the loudest possible statement that could be made short of a declaration of war. And what came out of it was something better than war: a new charter, replacing the tier framework that had locked species like humanity in permanent subordinate status, replacing the Krath's de facto veto over assembly decisions, replacing, at its root, every structure that the fabricated theology had been used to justify. Humanity was not given a seat at the new table. They were given the central chair. Not because of the seed array assembling itself in the moon's interior, not because the Ethon had designated them inheritors, but because 43 species, having received proof that their entire history was a manipulation, asked themselves which civilization they would trust with what came next, and came to the same answer, independently, without coordination, because the answer was not complicated when you already knew what it cost to be trusted. Below the lunar surface, the chamber had gone quiet again. The transmission array was damaged, the upper sections destroyed by the third and fourth strikes, but the broadcast had completed, and the broadcast could not be recalled. It was already traveling at light speed toward every edge of the galaxy, carrying the Ethon's final account into the permanent record of the universe for as long as the universe kept records. Rhea sat on the chamber floor, back against the column. Vero was beside her. Her security detail leaned against the crawler, reporting into Artemis 4. "Oracle," she said. "Yes, Commander." "The seed array, the manufacturing cycle, has it started?" "Yes. Full activation triggered it automatically. The first Ethon fleet configuration will begin construction in 71 hours and 43 minutes, using available lunar material. The process cannot be halted once begun." A pause. 200,000 warships over approximately 11 months. Vero looked at her with an expression that was trying to be neutral and failing. Humanity technically controls 200,000 warships now. Technically. The Krath fleet totals 11,000. Yes. Every species in the assembly knows this. Yes. Reyes leaned her head against the column. She looked at the ceiling of the chamber, at the perfect designed surface of the greatest thing humanity had ever found, built by the civilization that gave the galaxy its life and was then erased by the civilization that wanted credit for it. "Oracle," she said quietly. "The Ethon. After all of this, what did they actually want to happen?" Another long pause. The longest Oracle had taken. What they had always wanted, it said. What they spent 30,000 years working toward. What they seeded 300 planets hoping to someday see. A final pause. A galaxy that could take care of itself. Reyes was quiet for a moment. She thought of her mother's morning walk, the waterfront, the way Seattle's sky looked at 6 in the morning. She thought about it completely, let it exist fully, did not push it away. Let it be what it was. Then she stood up. She picked up her radio. "Let's go back up," she said to Vero. "We have about 40 phone calls to make, and I'd like to make them from somewhere with coffee." General 6 returned the Iron Covenant to Krath space without firing again. He filed a formal request with the new Assembly Council for a framework to address accountability for historical violations of Ethon preservation mandates. The first formal Krath accountability submission in recorded history. The Empress signed it. 40 years later, historians would note that the peaceful dissolution of the Krath Dominion, the dismantling of its governance structure, the restoration of autonomy to 60 subjugated worlds, the opening of 10,000 years of hidden archives, began not with a battle, but with an 11-minute broadcast transmitted by a 50,000-year-old machine that a USAF lieutenant commander had activated by pressing her hand against a handprint built for her before her species could read. The Ethon chamber was preserved exactly as Reyes had found it. No alterations, no expansions, just what they had left. A plaque was placed at the entrance. Found by accident, activated by choice, changed everything. Below it, in handwriting no one ever admitted to, Lieutenant CMDR M. Reyes, USAF Space Corps. She didn't hesitate. Outside, the moon was changing. The damage to the transmission array was visible from Earth's surface on clear nights, a subtle asymmetry in the crater peaks of the Sea of Tranquility, the geometry slightly wrong in a way that no natural geological process could explain. Astronomers cataloged it. School children learned to find it with backyard telescopes. It became the most photographed detail on the lunar surface within a year. Below that visible damage, in the lunar interior, something ancient and vast and patient was beginning to remember how to build. And on Earth, 2,300 meters of lunar rock above a glowing chamber that smelled like nothing human, but somehow felt like arriving somewhere familiar. 60 star systems were looking at a galaxy that had just changed its entire structure in 11 minutes and 40 seconds. Not because of a war, because of the truth. Because humanity had found it and chosen, without hesitation, to let it out. The Ethon had seeded the galaxy with life, and the last thing they planted was the means to protect it.